So the reason why I'm bothering to tape this is, as much as I enjoy being able to have a record of all of the glorious words that spill out of my mouth, but is that I want to say some things that will sort of be like casting a vision for all of us and see how you take that and how you respond to that and if you resonate with that. Because I think there is something exciting that could be happening with this shift to Sundays, with thinking about a connection to this complex that gives us an opportunity, especially to pursue some of the types of things that we associated with big church, that, we as the young adults group are sort of like, yeah, we could go volunteer and do this thing, or serve in this way, or connect with people beyond the group in this way, that is not there anymore. And so you look, what are some other ways that we can do that? And so I think I've talked about that a little bit with people. We'll see how that flushes out. But underneath that, there's an idea that I think will be comforting for us, encouraging for us, and exciting for us that we can claim to. And we've never really had like a, what'd you call it, like a brand or a specific real, like our own name or something to the group, right? We've always been like CLF Young Adults. And there's even sort of this little sense of pride of like, we're not trying to be all hip and trendy and come up with the coolest sounding special name that separates us from the community that we're a part of, right? But I was thinking, as I was figuring out what I might like for us to talk about and hold in our heads and in our hearts for going forward, that it might be time for that now. And that there was something in particular that started coming to me that...
we're all hipsters now.
Yes, that I thought might actually be really helpful. So, you can go forward.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Oh, okay, sorry.
You can.
I don't think you're close
Here.
So there's this theme that happens a lot in the Bible.
We have the Bible verse.
I will get to that. I will ask you to bring it up in a second. Not quite.
Are we
yet,
doing the theme first then?
No. But there's this theme that comes up a lot in Scripture about exile. Obviously, the biggest thing is the actual exile when Israel was conquered and had to go to the other countries that conquered them. But there was a pattern of that like I'd say that that's sort of what happened to Joseph when his brothers sold him into slavery. I'd say that that's what happened to David before he was king, when Saul was kind of chasing him around. That happened to some of the prophets. I'd say that to some degree you could describe what Jesus' ministry was like as kind of its own exile, especially in Luke. He comes out of the desert. He makes this announcement in his synagogue in his hometown that the kingdom of God looks like this, and I'm here to fulfill that. And then it says, and everybody chased him off. And so to some degree he was like going from town to town anyway, but there was always that starting point of like a prophet is not welcome in his own town. And he was going to have to go from place to place. He was never going to just be settled and have people come to him. And the same thing happened with people who started the early church, that part of what kept moving them from place to place was that they would be in one place and then they'd be told, you have to go away. And these changes happen sometimes through the Bible because someone else does something to the person who ends up in exile. Sometimes they happen because the person who ends up in exile has done something in exile as a consequence. Sometimes it just seems to be a thing that happens. Like there's no particular super cause or something that is a big part of the story, but people find themselves wandering or in a different place in a different circumstance. And one of the things that's a pattern of this is it may be feeling like I thought I understood all of what God had laid before me. There was this thing that was working, there seemed to be this plan, and now it turns out that can't be the plan anymore. And again, it doesn't matter what the cause of that exile was, but people find themselves in that place, and they wonder, so does that mean, am I out of God's grace? Am I out of connection with God? Am I out of what God could have for me and what it means to be a part of God's community? And so there starts to be this term and this idea that prophets use or God uses to tell people who find themselves in that circumstance. And it's called remnant. Right? Does anyone have an immediate association with the word remnant? You've heard that before.
Something left over.
Yeah. Right? It's the, the whole, when something like this happens, the whole community is never together.
Are you going to call us the remnant?
Yes.
Because we're the remnants of CLF?
Yes.
Okay. That works.
So you ruined it.
I kind of like it.
So I think, but it's a weird thing. Like what it comes from is like a piece of cloth is where it's used sort of popularly the most, or secularly, or functionally. It's like when you have just a small piece of cloth torn off or something like that. And so it's still there, but it feels maybe a little tattered, maybe a little beat up, a little disconnected. But there's still something woven together, and there's still something that can be done with that.
Pretty hip.
And I really feel like that's a close parallel to probably how we feel, and also like really where we're at, but also what we can be, because as much as there's a little bit of a sadness about that, and understandable, and there's no sense in denying that, God also really seems to love remnants. Like as much as it'll come from like the exile specifically, God's like, well, this wouldn't have happened if you hadn't have been so unjust and idolatrous. Like, this is sort of your own making, and it's a consequence, and you got to take it. But, like somebody like Joseph, he was a remnant of his family that got sent off to Egypt. It wasn't of his own doing. Maybe he was a little bratty, but it was really his brothers deciding, we don't like this guy, so we're going to sell him into slavery. But God just seems to love, all right, it's not maybe what you expected, but I'm not going to leave you alone. And actually, it's a great place to build. And you can start to weave things around the remnant that become a new vision or a new identity. And God just seems to have a real heart for making sure that the remnant understands, I am faithful, I am with you. And also that this is not done. A remnant is not just sort of the last gasps of a death knell. A remnant is the ashes of a phoenix that get to start something new that God's like really excited about. And you see that all through Scripture. And so there's this one particular passage in Jeremiah that we can skip to that I think captures what it is that God says to any remnant. And this particular is the remnant from Judah and Jerusalem that's going to go off to Babylon. Already half of their country, a couple hundred years before, had been conquered by Assyria and basically just scattered who knows where. And now the other half that had held on, now they've been conquered and they're going to be carried off to Babylon. And so you think, what does God have to say to somebody like that? Well, you've learned your lesson now, or this is going to suck, but make sure that you maintain your sense of we are what we were, and we're not going to have any connection or idea of what to go forward or in our new place. And God actually says something really interesting. So I'm going to read from Jeremiah 29, 1-14. The prophet Jeremiah wrote a letter from Jerusalem to the elders, priests, prophets, and all the rest who had been taken to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar. This was after King Jeconiah of Judah and his mother had been taken into exile, along with servants of the court, officials of Judah and Jerusalem, and many of the craftsmen and artisans. The letter was hand-carried by Elisah and Jeremiah, whom Zedekiah, king of Judah, dispatched to Babylon on a diplomatic mission to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. This is what Jeremiah's letter said. This is what the Eternal, commander of heavenly armies and God of Israel, says to those he exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses, Make homes for your families, because you are not coming back to Judah anytime soon. Plant gardens and eat the food you grow there. Marry and have children. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they can have children. During these years of captivity, let your families grow and not die out. Pursue the peace and welfare of the city where I sent you into exile. Pray to me, the Eternal, for Babylon, because if it has peace, you will have peace. This is what the Eternal, Commander of heavenly armies and God of Israel, says to you. Don't be fooled by the false prophets and fortune tellers among you. Do not listen to dreamers or their interpretations of dreams, for I did not send them to you. They are prophesying lies in my name. So says the Eternal. If you want the truth, this is what the Eternal has to say. You will remain in Babylon for 70 years. When that time is over, I will come to you, and I will keep my promise of bringing you back home. For I know the plans that I have for you, says the Eternal. Plans for peace, not evil, to give you a future and a hope. Never forget that. At that time you will call out to me, and I will hear. You will pray, and I will listen. You will look for me intently, and you will find me. Yes, I will be found by you, says the Eternal, and I will restore your fortunes and gather you from all the nations where you've been scattered, all the places where I have driven you. I will bring you back to the land that is your rightful home. Right? This is like a really powerful thing. There's this expectation that maybe some prophets have been saying, no, God's going to say there's like a last-minute rescue, like in a blockbuster movie or something, where everything looks like it's lost, and then all of a sudden the truck comes crashing through the wall of the warehouse where someone is tied up, and everything turns out okay. God says, no, that's not what's going to happen. You have to accept that this is your circumstance. It's not easy, and it's sad, but we need to allow ourselves to live in this new time and in this new circumstance. And know, though, that God is not leaving us alone. Just because the truck doesn't come bursting through doesn't mean that God is not aware of how we're doing, where we're at, and wants to be with us. Also, there could have been this thing to sort of despair. All is lost, even though we still have ourselves, and some of us are alive, and some of us are together, even as we're being sent off. Let's just assume that God is no longer with us and give up the dream, the vision of what it meant to be God's people. We can't be Israel anymore, so we can't be anything anymore. For us, it's that we can't be CLF. What does that mean I'm going to be able to be anymore? And God says, no, your identity is actually not even tied to your country or to your nationhood. Your identity is tied to the bonds you have to each other and to me. And so carry that identity with you and implant it where I'm going to send you. I feel like that's kind of like us. We can still carry our connections to each other, the faithfulness that God has, and even what we care most about from CLF, and say that can still be something that we can take somewhere else. Now, it may be that some of us decide, or other people in CLF have decided to go and take that to a different church. It may be, for us, though, that we see this chance to be like our own little remnant, our own little church plant in a new circumstance that still has that foundation, still has those roots, and is built most on our relationships together and the vision that God has given us. And I think that that's the opportunity that we have to find out by meeting on Sundays and by sort of thinking of ourselves less as a demographic-specific discussion group connected to a particular big church, and now more as our own remnant in a particular community that's all around us and that we have an opportunity to connect to, even in small ways. All right. So, remnant, that, as long as people think that that's compelling, is what I think I'll start referring to us as. And I want it to all come back to this same idea, this idea of feeling in exile and acknowledging that that's painful, that it's something not easy happened to bring us to this point, but that God does not leave us alone, and that God weaves a new cloth around us, that God tells a new story around us, that God adds more puzzle pieces to our little corner, that we have left of the puzzle. And I think that there's something really compelling that we can do about that. Two verses in particular that stick out to me from that are one, depending on how it's translated, there's seek the peace or the prosperity of the city I will send you to. Right? This is, you have just been conquered by people that don't like you. They want to take you away and basically exploit you. And maybe sometimes we feel that way. Like we have something or someone has done something to us that really must not like us, and I just want to like be angry about it or be upset, whatever it is. But God says, in order for you to carry your identity, you are going to seek their good, even as they have done something horrible to you. And that's what it means to be in exile, to not allow the pain to dull your identity or steal that from you on top of everything else. And if you carry that with you, then that does mean seeking the good of an enemy. But that's a powerful thing to do and shows that you haven't truly been conquered. And I got to wear my shirt today. I found this on a website. It's not actually for it, but it says living for the city. And I've always loved that verse about seeking the peace and prosperity of the city that you get sent to. And so I found this. I don't think it necessarily has anything to do with it, but that's the instant association that I have with this. I've never gotten to really like express that before, so I was excited to get to do that. And then the other verse in there is one that we've probably heard a lot, just sort of in an isolated way. I know the plans that I have for you, plans to give you a hope and a future, right? And a lot of times that maybe has been said to us. We've even talked about this before. This is often sort of a verse that's taken out of context. That it's often said to us when we are feeling especially uncertain or broken, and people will say, well, this will pass, and God has this really great thing, your greatest dream that you could have, God will give to you. Right? And this verse, when God actually uses it, is you are about to go into exile, but I have plans for you. You are not done. You will have a hope while you're in exile. You have an identity while you're in exile. You will build a future and a present for yourselves while you're in exile. And it's more like in that pain, you're going to, and in that struggle, you're going to birth something that you probably, if you had to just choose it abstractly, would not choose. No, I don't want to go into exile and have this thing. But I'm still going to give it to you, and it's going to be good for you, and I'm going to remain with you. And then eventually, there is that hope of, like, in 70 years, there won't be exile anymore. There will be something new, and there will be something bigger, and there will be something that has a little bit less of that turmoil and is more on your terms. And I think that we can hold on to that as well. That I don't know how long we're going to feel like, well, we're the little remnant, and we're in this new context, and maybe for some people it'll be we're the remnant and we're in a new church and it takes a little while until we feel like this is home. Or for us, maybe we're a remnant and we have these things that we're trying to do our best to follow God's lead on, and it can be exciting and interesting. But maybe eventually like that actually allows for growth, for new friends, for new connections, for new possibilities, that turns into something that feels like now its own thing. And not just like, okay, we're sort of like the CLF remnant, right? But now we're our own, we'd say we've processed CLF and it was good and it was great, but now we even feel like God has given us this thing that's somehow not just based on our memories and all the things that we valued from there. And not that we would ever stop remembering or valuing it, but I'm just acknowledging, probably for a little while, that's just how it's going to feel, and there's nothing wrong with that. But God still calls us to something, I think, that can be really cool.